Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true firsthand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. Something I've discovered within my psychedelic experiences is that what we are ultimately experiencing is the moving of energies through our minds, bodies, and spirits. This being said, many times I have found myself judging myself for my wanting to move, stretch, or even have a full-on sprint during a ceremony. Once I was able to break through that and realize that when I am craving physical movement, to dive into that and allow the energies within me to be moved, I experienced an immense sense of freedom. On this week's episode of the show, we chat with a dear friend and brother of mine who is no stranger to expressing himself through his movement practice, especially while interacting with plant medicines. What he has taught me is not only how integral it is to listen to our body's calls to move, but also how to have more fun in my movement practice while interacting with these medicines without self-judgment. My goal for this episode is to allow the conversation, laughs between us, and movement to inspire all of you to reimagine how you are viewing the movement of energy within you so that you can each find the same renewed sense of freedom that him and I have found within our movement and lives as a whole. So please give me a big hand in welcoming Mr. Grant Thomas to the show. Grant, pleasure to have you here, my man. What is up in your world?
Pleasure to be here, man. Well, I just had an epic conversation with a dear friend of mine just before this. So all is well in the
maybe
cosmos.
Foreshadowing, right? Hell yeah, dude. And
listen to both.
Yes, definitely. To buy the ticket and take that ride, guys. Grant and I are fortunate enough to have got to do round 2 on Highly Optimized and have that energy transition directly into this episode. And you guys are in for a real treat because I've been with Grant on a few different psychedelic journeys, and we've had some hilarious laughs, some really funny times. And I'm so excited to get into his backstory of how he got into psychedelics to begin with. And so, Grant, one of the things I love discussing with people is because we grew up in the times of the DARE program and Just Say No and all of these things, right? I really love showcasing how people made the switch from just say no to maybe sometimes say yes. So if you could bring us through that journey of what that looked like for you, what age you were, roughly anyway, and really what these things have opened up for you in your life so far. I would love that journey, man. Let's go.
Dude, I'm laughing right off the bat because you are talking to an essay winner for the DARE program in 5th grade.
Yes. If that 5th grader could see you now.
Dude, I straight up won an essay contest for the DARE program in 5th grade, and I presented my essay in front of the whole school. And I would say some things have changed. I would edit that essay quite a bit. Yeah, man, I mean, when I was going through like middle school and high school, I was very much focused on athletics and didn't view any sort of substances. I would drink from time to time in high school, but I didn't smoke any weed in high school. And really the first experience I had was with cannabis. I'll just give that because that's really more of the introduction, and then I'll go into my real first entheogenic experience, right? I was hanging out with my brother and we went to his friend's house, and the first time I ever got high was on a volcano.
Nice.
Dude, I don't know what we were watching, but I was just laughing the entire time, right? And just some great experiences that evening. We finished it off with smoking a joint this was just looking out at the ocean in Santa Cruz. And that was just a really cool experience, my first avenue into that. And that, led to, that was right before I left for college. And in college, I started to dabble more in cannabis. And I would say really the first experience that really blew my mind when it came to psychedelics or substances was we were going to a show. It was this guy called Amp Live, which is like electronic, jazz, and then L1011 was the other. It's like a duo of guys that do a bunch of loop stuff. And I was living, this was my junior year of college. I was living with a few of my buddies, and we're like, yeah, we're going to go to the show and we're going to take some LSD. And I was like, okay, I'm down. And so I was really unsure of how it would feel and all that. And so I ended up taking it earlier than everybody else. And we walked to the venue. And this is just like so typical, like stoner or psychonaut comment right here, but it really encompasses my first experience with it. And that was like, we walked outside, we were waiting there, and our house was slightly elevated. There was a balcony there, and there was a slightly elevated area for some stuff under there. And we're standing there all talking, and I was coming up, I was feeling it, and I was just like, I saw this wine bottle, and I was like, huh, is that wine bottle full? And like everybody in the group was like, no, it's empty. And I was like, oh, well, I'll take my outlook on life. And that was like the first like joke, or like, oh wow, I'm really open-minded. Everything's hilarious right now.
Yeah.
And I'm still very like cognizant and confident of myself. And so we went to the show. It was really cool. I remember like struggling to connect with anybody outside of the group, but was very much able to dance and feel the music, which was awesome. And I remember one time it got kind of overwhelming, and I just sat down in a chair at the side and like just continued to kind of wiggle and move, and just it felt great. So, that was definitely one of the few, I don't want to say many, but there was a good amount in college over the next couple of years where it was, I would say, more intentional than a lot of how certain people in college would do psychedelics, but still lacking intention. And there was one other time in college that I'd just like to speak of. It was that same year, and we had taken some mushrooms, and we're in my buddy's room, which was like these low ceilings, and he had like all these glow in the dark stars up there, and they were just like, pulsating and like all this while we're listening to music. And I remember lying back on the bed, and at this point I was like really in the depths of chronic pain and identifying with chronic pain. And it's more of a perspective thing rather than an action thing here, but it very much provides a good outlook on how these things come up, even in these, let's say, less intentional experiences, especially when I was younger. But I remember like feeling the pain in my body and just sort of moving and like, loving it more so, like rather than avoiding it, like actually acknowledging it and seeing it and feeling it. And so like in my mid back, and I remember thinking in my head, because I was like, I'm not going to play basketball tomorrow, because my friends and I were going to go play basketball, and because of the pain. And I was like, I could play basketball tomorrow. Why not? Like, what's stopping me? And that was really such a powerful moment for me. One of those nuggets along the journey where like the next morning I was still wrapped up in the story. I was in pain, all that. But here I am talking about that. And it allows me to reflect upon that and embody that perspective. And then for anybody that's listening to this and in a similar situation, being able to share something like that, I hope that inspires someone to take action, because it certainly has inspired me to take action in my own life when those perspective shifts come up, in throughout life, where it's like, oh yeah, this thing's really pulling me down and all this. And it's like, I'm really grateful for this thing. I'm grateful for this message here. And I'm grateful for these signals of trying to keep me safe because I'm in pain. But fuck that. What do I really desire? What do I want to go create? Right. And so that's certainly been the story of my, let's say 20s is getting over that story, getting over that story of chronic pain. And that was really a big first seed in that particular journey. So yeah, I would, those are the ones that stand out to me from the early days.
That's amazing, man. I love it. Never gets old, right? Binary language acknowledged and very much accepted. It never gets old to hear how people got into psychedelics. And I'm so smitten over these things because I know firsthand, as I know you do too, and everyone listening who's interacted with these medicines knows how much they can do to benefit someone's experience of being alive. And, how much they can challenge it too, right? Depending on how you view it and what your experience is, where your set and setting is, yada, yada. And, you were talking about the first time you interacted with cannabis, staring out at the beach, at the water. And this is something I think I was chatting about it with Jeff Lester yesterday, right? That I've been nerding out on a lot of like stuff that's really challenging to get my head around, just about like different dimensions and, how gods came to be and all this kind of stuff. And, what I've come to realize, at least in my own experience, what I choose to believe is that nature is our God in this reality, right? In the third dimension, nature is our God. And so, the ability for something specifically like cannabis, which is, I think, one of the biggest, if not the biggest sleeping giant in the realm of psychedelics, to be able to help you enjoy looking out at the water and being present. I mean, we might look at that and say like, oh, cool, it was awesome. Yeah, like logically, you got some relaxation, blah, blah, blah. But think about if we choose to believe that nature is God, think about how impactful that can be, right? Like I know taking mushrooms or LSD out in the woods and just staring at bark for 4 hours and being so enthusiastic and excited to do so. I mean, it's been so life-changing for me in so many ways. And I think that's one of the things that I can now articulate is one of the best aspects of psychedelics for me, is to keep me present on what I choose to believe in this reality is God, which is the nature around me, right? The thing that we come from, right? The thing that consciousness is embodied in this reality. And, you mentioned chronic pain as well. And the first time I ever did mushrooms, I remember I was like laughing like a hyena. We're watching some funny stuff. And I was probably like 21 or so, around there. And I remember that throughout the night, as the mushrooms started to come down, I started noticing like my trap was just on fire. Like I'm talking like it felt like I literally ripped something. I have no idea what happened, but I remember like laying in my buddy's bed and just being like so like fixated on this pain. And oh my God, it's, getting into the stories like you were talking about, like, oh my goodness, what does this mean for the rest of my life? Am I going to be able to lift weights? I mean, let's talk about priorities right in that moment. And I'm tripping on mushrooms. I'm like, am I going to be able to lift weights? Right. And, all those things. And, it was almost a foreshadowing, because looking back on that now, I'm a completely new person. And it's not just psychedelics that have done that. I mean, psychedelics on their own, they can only show you a glimpse of what is possible, but then it's up to you to do the work in between. And I choose that work for love, to love yourself enough in between that you can integrate it. And so I'm curious for you, knowing that you do a lot of movement practice, knowing that you're big into a lot of different inner work practices as a whole, what are some of the things you found in your own journey that help you integrate what you learn? Because I imagine I can speak for both of us when I say that some of the things you can experience when you're interacting with psychedelics can be so awe-inspiring that it's really challenging to put words to. And so if we do not reflect on them after and really try to tap back into that in a sober state of mind, we're ultimately going to lose those downloads. And so I'm curious for you, what are some of your best methods to keep those downloads fresh and integrated into your reality? Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show.
Yeah, man. Well, want to bring it back to, I'll preface this on the first conversation we had. My buddy, I was having a conversation with him, and this is really one of those nuggets where, again, it's like, oh, this gives me the tool to go back to all those experiences where I didn't integrate and see the lessons and like take ownership right? And recognize that I can create from those experiences. So really, like, what this spurred out of was a conversation I was having with my friend, and he was talking about something that I could tell that, like, it was an experience, not like a heavy dosage experience, but it was an experience with just knowing him, probably mushrooms, right? And so I'm hearing him talk about this, and he never mentioned the name of this podcast, right? He never said this one time on mushrooms, right?
Yeah.
He never mentioned it, right? And so later that night, we were having a conversation, and it started to go into psychedelics, and he just spoke into it, where he was like, yeah, one of the things that I've really looked at with all this is taking ownership for the experience that I'm having while on those substances. Because if I give the power to the substance there, right, then I'm not taking ownership of it. I'm not embodying that experience. And so I'm actually diminishing the experience that I'm having by saying, hey, this one time on mushrooms or this one time on acid, right? And it's a great way to have a conversation. Just make sure you talk about the integration portion of it.
Absolutely.
And I brought up to him, I was like, hey, dude, like, when you told me that story earlier, I kind of assumed, but like, were you on something? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, well, you didn't mention it. And he was like, oh, really? Oh, and I was just like, wow. So here's this guy has this profound experience, and whether that be framed as good or bad, he is taking responsibility for it. He's recognizing that he's creating it, right? I think there may be some aspects of this where it's like, okay, yes, the plant is inducing this or whatever, but like, just the sheer ownership of the experience really allowed me to take a look back at all those experiences that I've had in the past and like reframe them and recognize the lessons that were there for me. And I just sort of wrote it off as like, oh, that one time on psychedelics, right? And so that's been really beneficial for me in terms of, I would say, since that experience, like I view the call, or I'm not feeling the call as much to indulge in substances, because I'm like, oh shit, those things that I've experienced, I can recreate those for me right now. I can work to create that for myself. Yes, they're facilitated. They will open me up to those states and allow me to experience new perspectives, a slight shift in consciousness. And that literally all it takes is like 1 degree shift right there. And then I can see something new or feel something new, and remember that and embody it, rather than, oh, I want to continue to go back to it. And this goes for whether it's a substance that you're viewing as something that you're using for transformation, or a substance that you feel you're addicted to. So anybody out there that's like, oh, fuck, I'm addicted to weed, or I'm drinking too much, I imagine there's an aspect of that it is a form of protection for yourself, right? There's a layer deeper there that allows you to take responsibility for the experiences that you're having. I had a conversation with another buddy, somebody that I was coaching, going through some problems with alcohol, let's say reliance, right? Or abuse.
Dependence,
dependence, whatever. It wasn't straight up alcoholism, but it just something felt like, this shit's got power over me. And it's like, okay, use the same shit. Hey, what do you like about that experience? Oh, I can wind down from work. Allows me to relax and socialize with friends and all this. I'm like, cool, focus on that. Not like, I wasn't saying get drunk and focus on that. I'm like, focus on ways that you can cultivate that experience in your life. So a moment where I have like this, hey, I can go play basketball. Oh, I was high last night and I was, it's like, dude, like I can go play basketball, right? I can go play with my friends and interact with them and embody that experience, right? So that's been a really helpful one for me. And that just goes across the board, whether that be more of a physical experience with it, mental, emotional, spiritual. It's usually going to be a hodgepodge of everything together, but it's allowed me to, let's say, get the message. And as many of these psychonauts of the early ages here have said, like, hang up the phone for a while.
Yes.
Like if you get the message, hang up the phone. And like, as we talked about when it comes to identity, if you get this vision of yourself or of something that you desire to cultivate in your life, whether it be a belief or a skill, well, shit, put your energy there rather than being like, well, going back to the well for more. And you're probably just going to get the same message.
Yes.
Or it's going to be a more of a harsh experience where it's like, hey, motherfucker, stop coming back here, right? Go embody that shit first.
Yes.
And I know people talk about this with some of the more powerful medicines, which I have not participated in, like ayahuasca and DMT and stuff like that. Well, but it goes across the board, right? I mean, same thing with smoking weed. Like, I'm not smoking weed right now because, like, well, I kept getting like the same energy, and it was like more of like this nervousness, unsure of myself. And I know there's some aspects of like story potentially weaved in there, but I felt a significant shift with it. And so I was just like, cool, it's going to be awesome when I come back to it, and it's going to blow my mind with something. Because my tolerance is going to be super low, and I'm going to need one puff, and I'm going to be that lightweight who's like, oh my God, So, it's the other aspect of that is all these things. It's a relationship, so relationships are dynamic in that sense. We wouldn't just always want to have the same relationship. If that's the case, like if I wanted to really go create something that's going to have influence on my romantic relationship, my relationship with my family, all that, doesn't mean I'm cutting it out completely, right? But it's definitely going to impact those relationships, and we want to be dynamic humans in that sense. So yeah, just keeping an open mind with how you're approaching it.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? I wanted to stop by while I had your ear and share a very special announcement with you. You may have heard people say that we are facing an epidemic of loneliness in the world right now. We believe that this is only half of the story, and that the real epidemic and the root of feeling loneliness is a lack of connection. Do you want to connect to more purpose and passion with the important work you are doing? Do you wish you had closer friendships with people who understand you, listen to you, and are truly present with you? Are you wishing you and your partner could move deeper into love together? The connection in all of these areas comes down to the one most important element of connection, the ability to connect with yourself. If you are ready to see change in your life, if you are ready to feel differently when you wake up in the morning, if you are ready to step into the life you envision for yourself, the first and only route to making these changes is settling in, quieting down, and being able to connect to yourself. Now, this can be a major challenge in today's world with media, culture, and other energies that pull us out of our ability to connect. When you've tried fitness, meditation, and other self-development practices and still find yourself feeling alone and lacking connection, you may be feeling out of options and wondering if you'll ever be able to tap into your full potential that you know deep down is possible in your life. What we have found in working with our clients is that plant medicines, and cannabis in particular, can guide us in having the experience of what true connection looks and feels like. In this way, cannabis can act as a rite of passage for connection and a gateway toward the spouse, tribe, mission, and life you know you are ready for. Now, the pitfall here is that many people become codependent on the medicines, such as cannabis, and expect the medicine to do the work for them. If this continues, what will happen is the user will find themselves reaching for more and more cannabis to feel connection, without taking ownership of their role in the outcome of their experience, and thus they will fall into repeating the same painful patterns. As Zen Buddhism teaches, how you do anything is how you do everything. Therefore, if this painful pattern is showing up in your relationship with cannabis, it is likely a reflection of the same patterns you're experiencing in your friendships, romantic relationships, business, and your relationship with yourself. Learning to work with cannabis effectively will supercharge your experience and will help you get the result you are actually seeking, which is connection. We created a program to support seekers and high achievers like you in doing exactly this. To learn how to work with the healing power of cannabis to connect you back to yourself so you can unlock purpose, passion, and creativity in all areas of your life. What this program will give you is the long-lost user manual for cannabis. This user manual will teach you how to connect with cannabis correctly so that the plant can act as your spiritual aid and ally in life, just as our ancestors understood and practiced. If you're ready to unlock the full power of cannabis, meet like-minded people on the same path as you, build more purpose into your life, and have the most fun doing homework you've ever had, this message is for you. To learn more and qualify for your spot in the program, hop over to our Instagram profile at highly.optimized and book a discovery call. The conscious cannabis revolution is here. Will you be joining us? Sending all of you love. Enjoy the rest of the show. Yeah, it reminds me right off the bat that codependency is not cute. Negation acknowledged, right? And as someone who's found himself codependent with cannabis for many years, to talk about cannabis, what I realized in that was that I wasn't codependent on cannabis, right? It wasn't anything cannabis was doing that did that to me. I was codependent on some form of safety that I was finding within cannabis. Mm-hmm. And the whole time, cannabis was yearning to show me, but my intention unconsciously was to run from things. And so therefore, cannabis would help me run from things, right? And so the second I began actually understanding how to interact with cannabis and the way that I teach and connect with cannabis and the way that I learned, with working in the industry and seeing this, unconscious rampant use that a lot of people were using was exactly like you were saying. The way I interact with cannabis now is when I'm curious about something and I feel as though there might be something blocking me, but I can't currently see it with the program running. So then what I do is I go under the knife, I interact with cannabis, and I look at what's going on. I look at the reaction that maybe I had. I look at something that, maybe it's like I have a creative block and I'm not exactly sure why, right? And I've exhausted some other options and I'm like, okay, let's go dive in and see what's happening. And then when I'm under the knife, quote unquote, I see that, I have this belief that I can't actually make $40,000 a month, or let's just throw out random things, or do really well in business, or yada, yada, right? And that's preventing me from unlocking the creativity that will get me to that goal. So then I'm able to then write that story out, flip that script, and then get that message and not necessarily need to interact with cannabis for a while in between that without getting just the same message again. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons I started this podcast, because what I found is that so many people right now with the rise of psychedelics and the popularity of them are just like, let's go again. Let's go again. Let's go again. And it's like,
run it back.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like the best case scenario in that is you continue learning the same lesson and you don't have any traumatizing experiences. The worst case scenario is that you have a traumatizing experience because you're messing with your consciousness, right? Your lease on reality. And so when you're going into things, especially to escape, I mean, sometimes things can happen that can affect your ability to integrate those into your life in a way that's going to allow you to live life in the highest regard, right? In the highest alignment with your greater good. And so I'm really glad you brought that up because, especially, cannabis, I see it the most, but also with even some of the more powerful medicines, I hear about it a lot. I mean, people smoking DMT a lot and doing ayahuasca. And it's like, it's not coming from a place of judgment. It's more like, I just know how powerful these things are. And personally, I choose the flavor of ice cream that's not doing that, like for my own personal journey. And I get nervous because I understand like how these medicines are meant to bite you if you're going to continue doing that, right? Like eventually you will get bit if you're going into it to escape. It's not the same as alcohol. Like alcohol will bite you, right? But it's in a different way usually. It's usually a longer, slow, degradation process, right? Where over time you're just like, whoa, I don't like the person I'm becoming. Whereas something like, ayahuasca, you go into that, running from your life and you expect that to solve your problems. And sometimes you can get pretty traumatized. And if you don't have the right people around you, if you're not in the right set and setting, that can lead to some challenges. And so I'm really glad you brought that up. And, I'm curious for you, like, what have been some of the challenges you faced when interacting with psychedelics? These could be stories that come up. This could be like, oh man, I did it at a music festival a couple of times and wasn't the right set and setting. Like, I'm curious what some of the challenges you've experienced are, because, I imagine for a lot of people listening, they want to ensure that they're doing things in a way that's going to serve them. And so hearing ways in which they should at least be aware of, hey, maybe I should think more about this before I drop acid in front of 30,000 people or something like that, right? Like, I'm curious what some of your challenges have been.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think very much going with the crowd has been something that stands out to me to sum up most of my challenges with it. And that has to do with, let's say, particular substances, the amount, the set and setting. So yeah, I feel I had a few challenging interactions on some substances at a music festival, and I was pretty high.
You weren't
and
low.
yeah, and I remember a lot of jaw tension going through that experience, and it proceeded for about a year after that.
Mm.
And it wasn't that I was like grinding my teeth, but I just felt more tension in my jaw. And part of, that was like the processing of the experience. The experience was one thing for sure, but the processing of the experience, very unintentional, or like, not intentional at all. Like unintentional would be like, oh, they've drugged me, right? But I was not intentional. I took these things on purpose, right? But I was not intentional with how I was going about it. And, what that led to was the way I expressed my experience with it to some people that I did it with. I very much, it was like doled down, or like, oh, this is just like you coming down from it, or like, I can't believe you'd say something like that. This is just what it is, and very much diminished in terms of my experience. And so very much not listening to myself, and also not having the kind of support that I view as let's say, recommended or necessary when going into altered states. I think one can absolutely have a great experience on substances at a music festival. However, it's very much one of those experiences that there's a lot of energy, and you're opening yourself up, right? So the people that you choose to be around, you're already around a lot of people, but your core group of people that you choose to be around, or if you go and you alone, that's wow.
Yikes.
Like you want to make sure that those people are there to support you, and you're there to support them, and in a way that is open to experiences of all types. So how one person has experienced music festivals and substances in a certain way, if that's being projected onto you, then I would say that's not the most supportive environment. You certainly want to honor your yes and your no. So yeah, I would say that's probably been more of the, I'd say that's been the biggest challenge. I've definitely had challenging experiences in terms of going into parts of myself, whether it be with movement or my emotions, or where I view myself spiritually, or processing some trauma and things like that, where it's been really fucking challenging. And I was like, thank you.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, those challenges right there, going back to what we're talking about, taking ownership of the set and setting that you're putting yourself in, knowing what you're putting in your body.
That's huge.
And then, yeah, honoring yes and no, taking ownership for the potential challenges that may be infringed upon you there, or you're infringing upon yourself. And then also when those challenges come up where it's like, oh my God, I'm seeing the straight up bizarro world of like, yes, last time I did this, it was all light. And this time it's like the exact opposite.
Yeah, it's all dark.
Right? Well, shit, that is part of it, right? There are two forces here, and one cannot exist without the other. If we want to go into heaven versus hell, right? You've got the devil taking the responsibility of having to take responsibility for that realm, right?
Yes.
And it's like okay, like Hades, right? And like that dude, like after going through a lot of experience in my life, it's like, oh man, like shit, that's like that's a shitty role. Yeah. And somebody's got to do it, you know. So the acknowledgement of the two forces, and the shadow and the light, and how much can be learned through those lessons if you are seeing something that's really dark and challenging, like rather than like resist that stuff, acknowledge it for what it is. I think certainly you want to be aware of the states you're putting yourself in and all that. But yeah, those have been my challenges.
What I heard right away was, others invalidating your experience, right? And this is like one of the common challenges I see with people when they're interacting with psychedelics is they are around people who are going to tell them, oh, you shouldn't be feeling that way. That's totally, and they might not mean it, of course, to like invalidate their experience. They probably don't even know what that word means or whatever, but they're just, that's their programming is like, hey, like, no, don't feel like that. You're going to ruin the vibe of everyone else, and all these things. And, not being able to allow that person to move through things. Right. And, this is something that I've experienced at a music festival. And I swear, guys, like you can actually have a lot of fun interacting with psychedelics at music festivals. I just happen to have a couple of yikes stories. The one that comes to mind right away is, and it wasn't anything like my friends are great friends of mine. We really had no idea what we were messing with at this very young age and had no idea how to handle it. And so basically, long story short, I interacted with a very small amount of mushrooms and a very small amount of cannabis, but I had been driving. It was a 16-hour drive to this music festival. And the whole way there, I decided to look up what muscles were tight in my body the whole way. So 16 hours straight, I'm like looking at my phone, being like, okay, it's my scalenes. It's, it's this, it's that. So by the time I get there, I'm in full panic mode, right? Now, I didn't know this. I didn't even have the awareness at that point to realize how upregulated my nervous system was. And then I decided to interact with cannabis and psilocybin and walk around at this music festival. We finally got there. We found someone who had some stuff, yada, yada. And so long story short, I ended up walking around and we get back to camp and I just, I was sitting down and I just felt really something coming on that was dark. And I looked at my buddy and I was like, I think I'm going to die. And he was like, yeah, me too, man. And just like went on talking. I totally thought it was a joke. And that was like the last amount of words that I could speak before I was like, I have no more breath. I like every breath felt like the next breath. I could only take half as much. I was basically starting to have a panic attack. And this was like very soon after my father passed away and like a lot of other stuff was happening. And so, it's just interesting because in that moment, they did the best they could. I mean, they were kind of like laughing with me, being like, oh, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Cause I kind of fell into my tent, like stumbled over and fell in and kind of just laid in the bed, like trying to like hyperventilate and get back to normal. And I ended up being completely fine. And it was a great learning experience. That was one of my first times getting really bit by psychedelics. And I earned a lot of respect, or they earned a lot of respect for me after that. That was over 10 years ago, I think. And, that was at a time where I was curious and that's why I was interacting with them. I wasn't doing it to numb or anything like that, at least intentionally. I was very curious. I'd had some experiences and was just like interesting. And one of the things I've noticed about like psychedelics versus alcohol, right? What I've found is that I get along really well with people that are interested in psychedelics, even if they're not like currently practicing or they're just excited enough to try things like that. And I'm curious for you, like, what do you feel? This is like an open-ended question, but what do you feel like gets someone curious enough to interact with something like a plant medicine? Because I know from talking to many people who are like vehemently against them, they're like, no, it's just not for me. Right. And then there's certain people like you and I who are like, hey, that sounded exciting in some way. Right. Like, I'm curious, like what's going on. And I know this is an open-ended question, but like what immediately comes up for you when you think about people that are interested in doing things like changing their consciousness?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's so much information out there now and like so many people talking about this like we are right now. And, with that, I think a lot of people's curiosity is piqued. And also there could be the opinion as well of like, oh my God, this is just an excuse to take a bunch of drugs, right?
Yeah.
And I would never do that, right? I wouldn't if you asked fifth grade Grant. Right? But yeah, I'm just thinking back to myself, and I think having some really, again, like cool examples of people that had very interesting viewpoints, right? And it wasn't that they were just touting like, oh, I've blown my mind open with this, but like just some friends where seeing some things in them and how they view the world and getting curious and And I think one of the things for me was like getting my mind expanded by a few other things. So like particular philosophies for sure, where rather than going to, let's say, the particular substance, like you have plenty of teachers that have really benefited from going into these states, and they're sharing their experiences in what they've learned through that, or how that's really changed the way they've looked at philosophy of life or how they've lived their life. So I think looking to some very powerful speakers and storytellers in that regard have been really beneficial for me. I mean, the one for me that really stands out is Ram Dass, because I view it as like spiritual comedy, where it's very much more like he's sharing his journey, right? Whereas you look at somebody like Alan Watts, who I don't know how much he dabbled in, but very much more like a presentation of Taoist philosophy with like or Eastern philosophy with like a Western twist. And it's still very funny and whatnot, but it's not story anecdotal stuff where like Ram Dass is straight up like, I'm an open book. I'm sharing my experience and what he shares in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and then 2010s after his stroke, right? You go through that progression right there and it evolves, right? And that's really cool to see, right? And so somebody that I look to these examples where somebody has been dynamic throughout their entire life, right? And not saying that psychedelics have been consistent throughout that whole process, but it certainly has been a catalyst. So that, just looking to some cool examples and then having some experiences like, okay, with breath work and, getting rid of any of the labels of like, this is going to really like blow you open or whatever, but just simply like getting into the breath and altering, like we talked about, that 1 degree of change in terms of consciousness or perspective. And that right there can really allow somebody to see new possibilities. So anything that's going to broaden horizons, I would say, without actually taking the substance, right, is going to then make somebody more open to that process. So, yeah, I mean, it's the best way I can sum it up.
No, I mean, that makes perfect sense, and we could like, when I think about this, I often think about, of course, like it plays into the way you were raised, right? And that could be one or the other. Like I know plenty of people who interact with psychedelics because they grew up in a very strict household, a Christian background and, or Catholic background, something like that. And they were just like, this is not what I want. And they want something that's almost the polar opposite. And then there's also people who grew up with parents who were more like, Rachel's parents. They were always open about things and, they never recommended anything, but they were just, she'd ask a question and she'd get a legitimate answer from their experience, right? And it wouldn't have any, these are really bad and you shouldn't do them. It was like, like for instance, her dad would be like, I interacted with him and then it was interesting, right? Like, and so it wasn't, really siding with them or siding against them, but it gave her like, oh, so these things aren't the devil. Okay, cool. So now they're more neutral to me. Okay. So now I can actually like look at them as not a, a popularity thing or in the limelight, but more of just like another tool in a big toolbox called life. Right. And, that's something that I'm really excited about, the rise in popularity of psychedelics, because I do feel that even though right now, they are getting more popular and they are a little bit more like quote unquote cool to do. And that whole terrible philosophy that goes along with a lot of things like cigarettes and everything that's gone through the ages, but eventually it will level out and there'll just be another thing that's some medicine. Right. And I feel as though so many parents I've seen these days are training sounds weird, are teaching their kids to look at these things as simply medicines, right? Like I know when I worked in the industry, of course, like a big question you get a lot for parents is, oh, what do you tell your kids about cannabis? And they'd kind of look at you puzzled. Like, it's funny because the people who would ask it like that, like, what do you tell your kids about your cannabis use? Like, I tell them that it's medicine, just like anything they get from the doctor, and that they should respect it. And there are certain times in which it may be necessary, but it shouldn't be abused. And there's a really good reason for it when there is a reason. Right. And so, that's been very interesting to me and curious for you. One of the things I love getting into people about is the changes that psychedelics have been able to have on their life, right? And like the messages we talked about that have allowed you to hang up the phone with confidence and be like, I've got enough on my plate right now. And so I'm curious for you, like what have been some of the aha moments, downloads, and ultimately the lessons that have come through as a result, right? I imagine that many like much of how you came up with disco for dudes and things like that were inspired from something that you were able to pick up, like an open-mindedness, let's say, from a psychedelic experience. And so I'm curious for you, like, what have been some of the lessons? What have been some of the traits and takeaways you've gotten from these medicines over your time interacting with them?
Yeah, man. I mean, so many, and I've shared a few already. And more so, I would say, in terms of the mindset piece of just opening up perspective and seeing new possibilities, and knowing that that's available, right? And not just siloing it to a 2-hour experience, 8-hour experience, 12-hour experience, but really like, oh man, this is really worth writing down, or like, I see this in my head now, and I'm going to use some negation language here, but I'm not going to ignore it. I'm going to embrace this stuff. Right.
Yes.
So, the mindset piece. Yeah. There's two things when you were talking about that, are really two experiences that really come up to me. And one is more of like, going in, right? And then the other one is
to an ordeal.
Yeah. The other one has been more recent, and very much true to me and how I view these experiences. So I'll share both here, but yeah, last year, just being like cooped up in my apartment, I felt called to do a substantial amount of mushrooms, and really, I had taken in a lot of information from different systems of movement, different modalities, and I've been practicing a lot of Eastern modalities as well. And I ended up moving around very intensely. I had the windows opened up in my apartment. I had these sliding doors, and the wind was stirring, and I just the concept of energy around me, and the concept of my connection to it, and being able to pull or push or coil or weave or put energy into a particular ball was wild. And so there was no music playing. I was simply just listening and really aware of all my surroundings there. And I remember, like, call me crazy, whatever, but I was like pulling the wind into my apartment, and like being able to wield it, and just like really getting into my feet. And at that point, feeling more of the fascial lines, and getting even deeper with the meridians, and feeling everything connect in that way. And around this time too, like, there was this family of hawks that would just fly around this area. And I just remember these guys just like soaring and making their noises and whatever. And here I am in my apartment, just like feeling like I'm pulling all the strings, right? And it really just was like, oh my God, like this is some crazy qigong shit right here.
Yeah.
I very much felt like there are two things I felt like. One, I felt like a martial artist, like like I was accessing like past lives or whatever, that I was like a martial artist, and I didn't have like the repetitions or whatever, but it was deeply ingrained in me that I could cultivate energy in my body like this. And so I created a very overwhelming sense of belief in these particular not even modalities, just more so energy cultivation, qigong, keeping it very broad. And then later on in that experience, I turned into, which I shared this with you, and this was still continued to feel like lines through my body. I turned into a serpent person. So let me describe what the serpent person is, right? So one, we got the one main serpent, right? So it's going to be my spine. I've got my head and my T-spine, my head and neck going down to the T-spine, going down into my pelvis and all that. And so that's that one kind of like serpent right there. And so
like
the serpentine movement. Exactly. I was feeling the Kundalini there, right? The serpent energy, feeling stuff spiral up, spiral down. And then each one of my limbs, there were just snake heads that are like were my fingers and my toes. And I know this is really wild shit right here.
This is why we have a psychedelic podcast, Grant, so we could talk about this kind of cool stuff.
And so I felt all the stuff that I've been working on with like lines of the body, fascial tissue, meridians where like, okay, through my feet and through my hands, my ability to torque through my pinky finger traveled all the way up into my lat, and I could really feel that engagement. And I started to feel the spiral lines through my body on a way that I had never felt them before. So this certainly allowed me to access some parts of my physical experience that I wanted to embody on a more regular basis. I was feeling so connected to my body, so connected to the ground. I remember, everything, sensory touch throughout my body was like very accessible. So I remember rolling my face on the ground and going around my orbital bone on my carpet and just like really engaging all the sensory inputs and accessing a deep primordial experience of the body. And so, that particular experience right there, I imagine, looking back on it, I don't remember the order, but I imagine it was probably more of like deep primordial stuff. And then I came out of that and I was like, yeah, playing with energy, pulling strings,
Yeah.
That was just a really interesting experience and provided a lot of context and experience for a lot of the stuff that I had been shoving in my brain information wise. And it allowed me to really start to trust myself and carve out my own path there. So I started to work on some stuff movement wise that like I very much view as the seeds of what I'm doing now. When I play with the foot bag, like one of the things that I recognize with that is oh my God, like, okay, yeah, I can create this chi ball here and that's always available, right, with my hands, but like I'm playing qigong with my feet.
Yes.
Like, and I got this little sandbag here and I can bend and wield the energy because it's a sandbag and it's got some interesting dynamic to it. So, I see so much of that experience as, providing trust in trying these different things that I never thought I'd be doing otherwise. And then more so on the dance front. And this one is like, really like, this is probably one of the more powerful psychedelic experiences I've had. And I would say yes, in terms of the impact, maybe not like, oh my God, I'm seeing shit, right? But like in terms of the impact that it's had on my life. So this is really comes down to like set and setting right here. So I had a really challenging conversation with somebody, ended up journaling for a while, working through a few stories, breathing into it. And I went outside and I smoked a spliff and I started to play hacky sack. And I was like, I was dealing with some heavy shit. And I was like, oh yeah, fuck yeah, dude. I'm like in my craft right now, working through this. Oh yeah, acting through it, like really channeling my energy into things that I'm passionate about and all this. And then I started to get dizzy. And it wasn't from the spliff. I smoked it and I was, playing and all this and I just started to get dizzy. And so I was like, okay, like what's available right now? And I basically, my car was in the driveway here and I was just like, okay, well, I'm listening to some music in my headphones and I'm just going to move around my car. I'm just going to circle it. And I just started to bound on my feet rhythmically, just kind of doing this weird dance that I do and just moving around the car in some different ways. And this one song came on and it's Alligator by Emancipator. It's the Goodly remix. So if you want to go listen to this, it's about 3.5 minutes long. So this song comes on and I'm just moving around my car, dancing around. And this is when I was in Utah earlier this year. And, so I'm just moving and I'm like, holy shit, I'm feeling so connected and like totally into flow. I stopped moving around my car. I just start dancing hardcore, completely in the flow, feeling myself, doing just super connected and just like overwhelming sense of belief in myself where it's like the stuff that went down today was really fucking tough. And here I am working through it. Here I am feeling into it. And like I was smiling and all this. And like the moment the song ends, I just uncontrollably, I mean, I'm shaking right now thinking about it. I'm tearing up thinking about it right now. I uncontrollably start breathing and I uncontrollably start crying. And I'm like completely debilitated physically. I'm on the ground, just like can't catch my breath. And just the amount of energy that I moved in 3.5 minutes. Sure, I smoked a spliff, but fuck, man, I was dance. That was dance. That was the psychedelic that I was experiencing, right? Was dance. And so I'm like fucking like shaking on the ground, like breathing all this stuff. And like I look up for a moment and we're in a neighborhood and there's a Mennonite family that's over there. And like they're not allowed to dance, right?
Yeah.
So like maybe a little bit, right? Because I know they're like a little bit more accepting of certain things than straight up Amish. But like, yeah, so like they're like the dad's like walking towards me, just kind of like, what's going on here? All this. And like I just like stand up and I start breathing like really heavily, just like start to calm myself down and like all this. And I'm just like, holy shit. Oh my God. Just like really like taking in this experience, right? And like part of my like what was going on in my head was like, I was like, this dude either thinks I'm super crazy or he gets exactly what just happened.
Yes. Because one or the other. It's not in between.
It was straight up crazy religious experience right there.
Wow. That's amazing.
And so, you know, when it comes to this sort of stuff, right? I mean, yeah, we can blast ourselves off and really feel into the different substances and all that, like I did. And I shared an experience where I turned into a serpent person and you know, lived a past life or whatever. Like, sure. What's available too is practices of movement, breath, mindset, working through stories, getting into your emotions and all this that can really, like a combination of that stuff can really lead to a lot of transformation. And the best way I can describe what I was feeling during that song while I was dancing, it was like, I'm in my body, I'm out of my body. I'm in my body, I'm out of my body. I'm in my body, I'm out of my body. Because there was no hesitation on anything. It was just completely allowing life to flow through me. And with that, I imagine as life was flowing through me, it grabbed on to all the gunk that I was experiencing in those moments prior and the stuff that I was working through, and allowed me to actually purge and expend that energy in a way that I mean, it was a straight up purge. I've never experienced anything like that. You know, there's plenty of experiences where it's like I'm crying and I can't breathe and all that. I've never experienced anything like that. And this was right around the time where I was committing to lead men with dance. And it's just like, I remember, you know, I was sitting there with Ben and his girlfriend, Mallory. And you've met Mallory.
Yeah.
And like, I went in my room, I did some breath work for 30 minutes, hoping that it would like calm me down, help me work through all the energy. And I was still just like shaking. And I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to put my shoes on and go dance some more. And like, Ben was on a call outside and he could just hear what happened, but he couldn't like leave or whatever in the middle of the call. And so I was about to walk out the door and he's like, hey, are you good? And I was like, I hesitated and he's like, come here, dude, like, let's talk. And so I was like visibly shaking and trying to share what had happened with them and, you know, just crying and really intense and all this and amazing energy looking back on it, like very much like how much I care, you know? And so feeling into that energy at the time, it was really challenging. But the one thing I can really, truly remember exact words from that conversation was just like, this is really tough and this is really challenging. And I've never felt more belief in myself than I do right now. And shit, man, that was what, April? So, I mean, yeah, sometimes that belief wavers, but I've created that vision. I've created that identity that I'm living into here. And I believe in myself, and I owe so much of that to that experience that day, and just the recognition to continue to cultivate that. It doesn't have to be this blast off dance experience either. It can just simply be something where I'm connecting with myself.
Absolutely. You know, two of the things that came up for me is one, Joseph Campbell's bliss is any emotion felt all the way through. It's like, oh, damn, like no matter what emotion, it can literally be bliss, right? And then the second one, which is my favorite thing, which is if you integrate properly, life becomes a psychedelic, right? Like the things that manifest in my reality now are just like, oh my God, that's what's allowed me to hang up the phone right now, right? Is that like I'm just so enthused with what life is giving me and the mystery of life being in this reality, being here now, as Ram Dass says, that I haven't felt the call to engage in those types of medicines right now. Doesn't mean I never will, right? But it means like I don't feel I'm lucky enough that I never fell into like a dependent pattern with most medicines except cannabis, but there was always that like, oh, could I pick up something new? And I'm sure like, yeah, even right now, could I pick up something new? It's a possibility, but do I feel like I need it? Not one bit. Right. And the last experience I had was very similar to you. It was on Valentine's Day with Rachel, and sobbing for hours. And like, I hadn't done that in literally over like 12 years. I mean, definitely way past when my mom got diagnosed with cancer, when my father passed away. I mean, all of that, I had never let emotion out through. And it wasn't like I was like, I'm going to be strong. It was just somehow it unconsciously got blocked, and it came out finally. And I remember just sobbing for hours, and it was the best thing ever. Like I mean, it was probably the most blissed out I've ever been in my life, just like fully in it. And I love that, man. It's so beautiful. And so I'm curious, where can people get in touch with you, man? I know you do a lot of movement practices and disco for dudes that people will hear and highly optimize as well, discovery for dudes. And, these things are so powerful when you include them into your plant medicine experience. And so for anyone listening who may be curious about psychedelics or already interacting with psychedelics and curious how to make your practice more interactive, Grant's program and what he does with this one-on-one coaching is incredible. And so I want to give you a chance to plug that. Where can people find you? Where can people find Discovery for Dudes, Disco for Dudes? When's the next date? Yada, yada. You know the deal.
Yeah. Well, dude, thank you for all that. Give me the opportunity here to share. Mm-hmm. My Instagram, best place to reach me, Grant S. Thomas, all one word there. And, I think I said this the first time we chatted, like when you get there, based on the conversation you've heard right here, you'll know that you're in the right place.
Yes.
And I talked a bit about the beautiful practice of Qigong channeled through the foot bag, the hacky sack that is. And you can check out my journey with that on Instagram as well at Footbagman. And that's all one word as well. I got the second class of Disco for Dudes launching first week of November, closing registration on that October 31st. Got 4 spots remaining. And if you want to have some experiences, even just a shed of that experience I'm talking about here, I know it takes some work to get to that point, but we're not just touching, we're going deep into everything that we talked about here in terms of the stories around dance and how to work through that, connect with your breath, connect with your rhythm, and then ultimately take that to a rhythmic practice of dance that can be very transformational and something that's always accessible, whether it be with music or not, something you can have for yourself, for you and your partner, and then also taking it to the community level. So you want to burst through those blockages in a way where you're taking action, right? I know a lot of men out there, including myself, have really struggled with living up in the head. Okay. With that, taking that creative energy and actually fucking doing something with it, and doing that in a way that's really fucking fun with dance. That's my invitation to you. So October 31st, get in touch with me sooner though. We'll hop on a call, run through the program, what it is, it's a good fit for you, and then how to get started. And then Foot Bag for Life is a program that I'm launching on my 30th birthday, October 22nd. I just got a whole bunch of custom foot bags for that program as well. So you'll be able to buy the program and the equipment for it. It's a tiny little sandbag that will change your fucking life forever. And that's what I got going. Check it out.
Yeah. You guys heard the man. And I have one last question for you, Grant Thomas. And that question is this. If someone listening was just swayed by you to experience psychedelic medicines for the first time, what is one piece of advice you would relay to them in order to give them the smoothest experience possible?
I would say seek out some guidance with some mindset work or some mental emotional work, right? If you really want to get into the psychedelic journey right there, I know I just dropped a lot of physical experience. And if you're a physical person like me, you might be like, oh, fuck yeah, I'm going to jump into that, right? But the fruit really lies in opening up your perspective, right? Because you could have a very eye-opening experience, yet if you're not open in your mind and in your heart and in your body, then that may be challenging for you to fully benefit from. So I would definitely recommend seeking out some guidance, whether that's before you do something like that, or during or after, or all the above. And, I know both Ryan and I, having a good amount of experience with this, if you identify with any of our experiences with that, right, reach out to us. We're dynamic coaches. we can guide in many ways. And this is obviously something that we both have found a lot of value in, and want to make sure that experiences that people are having are like, that's why Ryan's asking this question, that they are transformational, that they are providing benefit to one's lives, and not feeding into the narrative of like, this is the cool thing to do.
Yeah.
This is the thing to do if you're feeling called to do it. It's the thing to do if you're feeling that you want to experience transformation. And as I said, that can be accomplished in many different ways. So seek out some guidance. Absolutely.
I love that. And it's perfectly stated. And guys, when I first met Grant in Paul Chek's HLC1 course in San Diego, I had no idea how much our paths would be crossing in the 2 years that have since passed. I find it very amusing and faith restoring in knowing that the most important people in our lives were, in most cases, met by us in a situation in which we had no idea the future impact that relationship would have upon our experience of being alive. Grant is an absolute expert in the realms of coaching, dancing, getting in touch with our inner children, and most of all, feeling comfortable in expressing ourselves in whatever way we see fit in the moment. And to me, there has been no greater gift in my life than to be comfortable in the present moment. If you're looking for ways to be more comfortable in each present moment of your life and felt a yes from your heart in listening to this episode, do yourself a big favor in reaching out to Grant to discover all the amazing ways he can empower your ability to feel comfortable in your own skin each moment of your life. Grant, my man, thank you so much for hanging out with us today and bringing us down the memory lane of your plant medicine experiences and the lessons learned within. And until next time, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.
Aho, brother.